So, believe it or not, there are laws that must be followed during wartime. And this is an international convention of rules that has established and was agreed upon by most countries in the world. This is a thing called the Geneva Conventions. Now, what we need to focus on is how these Geneva Conventions apply to prisoners of war, because not everyone who gets involved in a battle gets killed or maimed. Many people are going to get captured by the enemy after battles during World War II. So, what do the Geneva Conventions mean for World War II? It's basically a way of having a common system of treating prisoners that were captured after battles. So, for example, laws of war include we will not inflict unnecessary destruction or suffering. You only shoot, stab, or blow up what you need to. We will treat prisoners of war, captured or detained personnel, and civilians humanely. Okay. It didn't matter that they were the enemy. If they got captured after war, they were to be treated as people. We will not obey orders whose execution are in violation of the laws of war. So, this is going to affect the Germans later. But that means you're not going to follow orders that's going to go against the Geneva Conventions. We are responsible for our unlawful acts. That means if you did it, it didn't matter if someone else told you to do it, you were in the wrong. And last one, we are entitled to humane treatment if captured. If you're captured, you have the rights to be treated humanely. Now, America was fighting the war in two very different parts of the world. So how these rules got applied was very different depending on where you were fighting. Over in Europe, the Nazis, for all the horrible, awful things they did, actually treated prisoners pretty fairly. This is an actual picture taken at a prisoner of war camp. So these guys, once they got captured after a battle, they were treated as if they were prisoners who had done something wrong in their own country and were arrested and put in jail. Now, on the other side of the world in the Pacific, things were a little bit different. The Japanese were not following the Geneva Conventions like the European nations were. So there's a tragedy, an absolute tragedy in World War II called the Bataan Death March. Now, do you remember how after the Spanish American War, America came into possession of the Philippines in the Pacific? We haven't talked about that for a while. So, Philippines become strategic during World War II because they are just south of Japan. And they can become part of the island hopping strategy the United States had. So it was in America's best interest to keep the Philippines safe. So we had a few hundred American troops stationed in the Philippine Islands, along with tens of thousands of Filipino troops who were ready to defend their country. The Japanese had captured the Philippines because the Japanese also wanted to capture all the islands in the region. So lots and lots of Filipino troops and lots of American troops got rounded up. And as American troops started coming into the region to try to take back the islands, the Japanese decided they couldn't stay on the coast right down here. They had to get them to a prison camp that was much farther inland and harder to access. So what that meant for the men who were captured was that they had to march 60 miles along the coast and then up inland till they got to the train tracks where they would be shuttled over here. Now, what we need to keep in mind, these soldiers had been fighting in the war, so a lot of them were wounded, a lot of them were sick. This is a subtropical climate we've got here. Malaria has not been cured yet. A lot of these men are suffering from disease. And once they got captured, they weren't being treated well by the Japanese. So you see just masses of people surrounded by armed guards being forced to march. They didn't have jeeps, they didn't have trucks, they didn't have trains. They were walking 62 miles. The Japanese had very, very brutal ways of making them keep pace. What you see here are a couple of people in stretchers. Now, if somebody slowed down to the extent they were slowing down the rest of the group, they got bayoneted to death by the Japanese. Shot, stabbed. Japanese had samurai swords. Sometimes they got chopped up. But if you got sick and slowed down, you were often put down. If you were injured, you got put down. If you stopped because you had dysentery and took too long to relieve yourself, you got put down. Anything that was going to make the pace slow down was going to get you killed. And sometimes Japanese troops needed to make an example of prisoners. So you see here a man moments before his execution. Thousands of people are going to be executed or mutilated or maimed or sickened by what happened to them on the Bataan Death March. And there were survivors of this that shared their stories as the American troops came in.